Hey friends, thank you so much for tuning in. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Jonathan Balcombe. I invited Jonathan as a guest because I want to add a scientific voice to the mix, as that is crucial to understanding the ethics of eating animals, including those who call the ocean home. His voice is critical to understanding the complex emotional and social lives of fish and challenging misconceptions about them. So without further ado, here's our conversation. So I've been introduced to your work largely through your incredible book, What a Fish Knows, which is a top recommendation from me for vegans and non-vegans alike. Tell me, how did you come to appreciate fish so much?
I had my experiences with fishes when I was little. I was taken fishing at summer camp. If there's a gene for loves animals, doesn't like to hurt them, then I inherited that gene. So I was quite disturbed by what I saw in the rowboat when I went fishing. It wasn't enough to stop me. I did fish a few more times by myself, but it was a short-lived career. And it's just for me, it's a thing of empathy. I can't help seeing things from the fish's perspective or the animal's perspective. As a sentient being myself, one who has emotions, feelings, pains, pleasures, stresses, excitement, joy. That's huge range of emotions that we know we can experience, physical and emotional and mental. Uh, it's not to say that all other animals have the same suite of feelings and capabilities, but they have some that we don't have as well. So, really, to me, my attitude towards fishes and all animals is driven primarily by the emotion of empathy, my willingness and desire to put myself in their position. And we can get pretty good clues that things are going bad or well for animals, thanks to what we learn from our own experiences.
I have a pretty clear indication of what inspired you to get involved with this work and what made you appreciate fish. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said in the past that nature isn't an all out battle for survival and that many animal behaviors are done for no other reasons other than for the pure enjoyment of them. Can you give me an example of animals engaging in behavior like this?
If you don't mind, John, I'm going to just pull out something from a file. Do you mind if I do that? Because it's my fish cheat sheet, and I wasn't aware we were focusing primarily on fish. Well, first of all, with joy, something I can say about positive emotions is that um, biochemically, when a vertebrate animal, and this probably applies also to a number of invertebrates as well. Whenever we do something, there's a little shot of endorphins, positive hormones that make us feel positive, uh, um, kind of pleasure compounds, if you like, dopamine, serotonin, octopamine, those kinds of compounds. And I think that's really significant. And I'm talking about getting out of a chair, opening a door, things like eating food, having sex. I mean, those are obviously going to cause pleasure, at least in our experiences. But I'm talking about just routine little things, going from A to B. Um, we get a little shot of pleasure compounds in our bodies. So my point here is that and this is a key point I want to make in a book, my next book that I'm working on, which is very apropos to your question. My key point here is that just the act of being alive and doing and functioning is rewarding. There's a phenomenon where you called what is it called? Darn, I can't think of it right now. Contra freeloading. Freeloading is when if you get offered something for free, you take it. Well, animals in cages, animals who are confined in a confined space, you can put food in a few food dish, and if that's all they have, they'll eat out of that. But if you scatter food over the floor, hide it in places, they will ignore the food in the food dish, and they will go foraging. Foraging is rewarding, even if you haven't found anything. Just the fact that you might find something. We can relate when we're in a shop looking for clothes, and we're excited to buy some clothes or what have you, or the Easter egg, hopefully vegan egg hunt when we're kids. The excitement of trying to find something. I look at squirrels, I look at birds on my feeders, and I look at squirrels in the neighborhood, and I know that there's a certain amount of joy from just being. So that's just a key point I wanted to make about the existence, the fact that just mere existence is, in my view, a glass half full, not a glass half empty, a glass at least half full, to allude to that saying. But we can joy is hard to know unless we're not in the animal's mind or body, so it's always challenging. These phenomena are private experiences. You can tell me you're feeling depressed or joyful, but you could be a good actor and you're actually not feeling those things. I can't know that it's true. Can I know that you can feel joy and feeling blue? Probably, because I know those feelings myself. So we have that, and we have the advantage with humans that we can give verbal reports. I'm feeling joyful right now, or I'm feeling kind of blue. Fishes can't say that to us, so or other species. There are some exceptions with language, with chimpanzees, sign language, and that sort of thing. And they are excellent windows into the inner lives of animals. So I'm being long winded here, John. Just as a summary thing, I would just say the evidence that we're able to get, and if we observe animals, their behavior, which is my field, ethology, animal behavior, we can get a pretty good clue as to how they're feeling. When Mabula rays, which is a kind of, they're in the ray shark family, shark group of animals, when they leap out of the water, there may be some function with communication. There may be some function with mate attraction, but I'm hard pressed to think that there isn't joy wrapped up in that behavior. Just to give one fish example.
I think it's important for animal advocates to understand that it's not just about the avoidance of suffering, it's also about striving for joy. And as you and I know, the vast majority of animals raised for food are living in conditions that look more like prisons or factories than what people think of when they think of farms. On the flip side of that, can you describe a behavior or a set of behaviors that animals raised for food are prevented from experiencing by virtue of living in these factory farms?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. The confinement, the intensive confinement in factory farms and aquaculture operations, they thwart natural behaviors. You think of all the important things that say a fish has to do in their day, their week, their month, their year, their lives. Foraging, getting food, having a safe place to go, getting shelter, being comfortable. And what I mean by that is maintaining homeostasis, maintaining a stable state. If you're too cold, you want to get warmer. Fishes are so-called cold-blooded. Not quite true, but that's the term we use. So that may be less of a priority for them. Although they're tropical fishes who live in warmer waters, and you put them in Arctic water, they wouldn't survive very long. So comfort, finding a mate, reproducing, being safe, keeping an eye out for predators, and that sort of thing. Social lives, living among others of one's kind, which not all fishes do, but a lot of them do. Um, and sometimes interspecific reactions, cleaner client relations on reefs where cleaner fishes clean client fishes. So it's a complex life. These animals have desires and needs, things they want to do, things they need to get done. And as I say, nature rewards them for doing behaviors that help you survive. That makes sense in an evolutionary perspective. So on the flip side, if you deprive animals from those things, from those opportunities to migrate, to find mates, to find food, which is what we do in aquaculture operations, we take away those choices. They're stuck there. They're usually crowded. There are if it's pens, there are parasites, sea lice of many species that can thrive in these crowded populations. They're not able to decide what they eat, when they eat, how much. Well, they can decide how much. No chance to go exploring. You're just swimming around or swimming in a tank. You're moved around every once in a while. You may be pulled out by a net, so you have no control over that. There's a phenomenon called dropouts in salmon farming. Dropouts are fishes who give up. They have high levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So it appears to be almost a depressed like state. And they stop eating. They stop trying to do anything. They just give up and they eventually float to the surface. And they may be about 1/3 the size of natural weight for their age. They just can't compete. So they shrivel away and then they die. That's probably a pretty clear example of what we would call depression in ourselves, only this time in a fish. And the living circumstances they're in are pretty depressing to consider.
What's so sad is that these animals suffer like this in silence, and the vast majority of people don't know this is happening. They're making choices that contribute to this sort of thing, whether they want it to happen or not. And that's why we have you here, to shed a light on this. What are some takeaways from your research that folks might be surprised by? How can we change our attitudes about fish?
One example I really enjoy, and I found it intriguing to learn about this, is the fact that fishes, the ones being tested, so it's just a couple of handfuls, they respond to optical illusions, optical illusions as we do. That is to say, they're fooled by them. One example is the so-called Ebbinghaus illusion, where you have two orange dots. The color doesn't matter so much. They're identical sized, but because of the arrangement of blue dots around them, big blue dots or little blue dots, the one with little blue dots around it looks bigger. The orange dot looks noticeably bigger. It's a very powerful optical illusion. We fall for that. We would say this one is the bigger of two dots. Well, you can train a fish to push their nose against the larger two circles and get a little food reward, so they're motivated to participate in this. And then you present them with the Ebbinghaus illusion, and they'll swim up to the orange dot that has the small blue dots around it. I should have brought a picture of this to show it to people, but they do the same thing that we do. And of course, these are randomized studies where you vary the side and the observer doesn't know, and that sort of thing. I think that's really profound because it shows that a fish is a fallible being. They're conscious, they're responsive, they can learn, they can participate in a study that we've designed, not the fishes themselves, and that they can have beliefs, if you like. That's how I think of it. This fish believes that this orange dot is bigger than the other one. It isn't, in fact. And it shows that they're not robots. A robot would have no problem noticing the difference. I put it in quotes because there's no experience. A robot isn't a sentient being, and some people might argue that. I don't. I don't think they're sentient, but a fish is, and a fish has consciousness and beliefs. So the fact that they're fallible is somehow reminiscent of our own state, the human state. We're all fallible. All organisms are. Deception is widespread in nature, where animals trick other species visually or chemically or in various ways. So, the optical illusion phenomenon, and that's one. That's not all. There's other optical illusions that the fishes have been tested on, and the ones tested show that they so to speak, fall for the optical illusion. Now, it was a second part of your question, and I'm going to have to get you to repeat it, John, because I can never remember two-part questions.
How can we change our attitudes about fish?
The most contact we typically have with fishes, this is the collective we, society, is on the end of a fork or perhaps on the end of a fishing line. Neither very positive from the fish's perspective, and neither of which will give you much of an impression of what's going on in the life of a fish. So I think knowledge, understanding, information is key. If we're ignorant about what it's like to be a fish, if we just pick up on the tropes, fishes don't feel pain, they're cold-blooded, they don't have emotions or feelings, all wrong. Science shows that's all wrong. Even the cold-blooded thing. We need to break through those old stereotypical beliefs and views, and the science shows it. We've got science to support us. So the way I think of it is we need mechanisms to make easily available information about fishes. We have YouTube now in the internet, and a fabulous information superhighway to share and learn information about fishes. I do a newsletter bi-monthly to people who subscribe to my newsletter, all about fish, all things fish. And I often point people to YouTube videos that show things that fishes can do. So to change our attitudes, we need to get out of the kitchen and the dining room. I hopefully without fish in there in the first place, and we need to get people reading about, learning about, watching videos about fishes. It's all. There's a lot of key information that's out there, and when we're informed, we tend to make more informed choices. Obviously.
I feel like if more people knew about the intelligence of fish, their capacity to feel pain, have emotions, express joy, and so on, that there'd be way more people who would take the welfare of these animals into consideration and make better choices for them. Do you feel like the aquaculture and fishing industries are aware of this? And if so, do you think they work to suppress it in any way?
Oh, any factory farming operation wants minimum exposure, hence the ag-gag laws, right? The agricultural gag laws, which are passed to prevent people from coming on the property, from filming it. Uh, it's under the guise of security, is what they say, but it's really because they don't want to be seen. They don't want what happens to be seen. It's horrible, and you like to think that quite a few people in the populace, if they knew, they wouldn't want to support the product. Animal agriculture is far and away the most violent industry in the world. Just the sheer numbers, billions, hundreds of billions, into the trillions, perhaps, according to some estimates, with fishes killed per year. Of course, that's also commercial fishing as well. But there's good reasons from their perspective why these industries don't want people to know. So that's another part of the puzzle. Part of the puzzle that needs to be completed is getting the information out there. Once again, information is key, and once again, the internet is a powerful force for conveying information. Of course, you have to look in the right place and check the validity of the source. But we need to. I recently was asked to be an expert witness for an undercover video investigation of a caviar farm in Canada. I live in Canada, and there were disturbing things going on there that were painful and stressful for the fishes. And I'd never even heard of it myself. I consider myself pretty informed. Um, so it just goes to show how much information is kept from public notice, and people need to be aware whenever they go and buy a product. It's a very empowering thing to know that you can influence practice. Because if whatever you buy, you're telling the manufacturer, whatever you did to get this product here, do it again. I don't want to. I don't want them to do it again. What's going on in factory farms? So I simply avoid the product. I don't buy those products. I don't consume those products. And we all have that. Most of us have the power and the capacity to do that if we so choose.
I'm so glad you mentioned the importance of getting the word out there about these things. I do a lot of my animal advocacy through social media, basically working to amplify pro animal content and to get it seen by as many people as possible. Is there a particular experience you've had with fish, either in person or in your research, that's had an impact on you?
Well, certainly more recently in my life, I mentioned being taken fishing when I was 8 or 9 years old. I lived a couple of years in Florida, less than a decade ago, and I would snorkel on the beach near where I lived. I'd bike down with my gear and snorkel there quite 2 or 3 times a week. It was one of the real joys of living down there. And the beach along there had rocky outcroppings about 5 to 15 yards off the shore. So it's very easy to get to this. And fishes are very attracted to structures. That's why we sink old ships and to help corals grow and to create habitat for fishes. It works very well. In any event, one day I was snorkeling there. I'd seen a few interesting fishes. I said hi to the gray snappers and the other ones that I would often see. But there was suddenly this little fish, kind of nondescript, pretty cute, very cute, swimming right next to my mask. And whenever I snorkeled off, this little fish would swim really hard. It was tiny to keep up, 2 inches long fish. It would swim and catch up. I'd think, oh, that fish is gone. And then suddenly it appeared there again. And this went on for 10, 15, 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I was thinking, it's time to get out. And this fish was still with me. And I actually felt guilty getting out because I'd become a little attached to this fish and I felt like it was mutual. So, um, how do we interpret that? What's going on? Is it just this little fish thought I was someone to commune with, or thought I was another being, or more, I was just a safe place to be? I wouldn't think of it that way. I would think to a little fish, somebody in a big black wetsuit with yellow highlights, swimming along with bubbles coming out of their mouth would be pretty scary. But this fish didn't feel that way. So that was just very touching to me. I remember when I was researching what a fish knows, one of my many correspondents said that he had had an Oscar fish. This is a cichlid fish, quite big, very popular in aquariums. And by the way, I'm not endorsing keeping fishes in aquariums. He had an Oscar fish and he had the tank on one side of his bed, and the Oscar was always near him whenever he was in there for the night, on his side of the tank. And then he rearranged the furniture, had it on the other side, and sure enough, the Oscar was always on the other side of his tank. I just love that anecdote. You know, it's an anecdote, it's not science, but it's touching, and it shows that fishes, they're social beings, or many of them are, and they have attachments. And there's tons of anecdotes about goldfishes becoming listless. A goldfish is trying to help other ones, uh, keep them aloft when they're ailing, when they're ill, and try to turn them the right way up, and that sort of thing. And signs of what could be depression, where they stop eating when their companion dies. A goldfish is a social animal. They should never be kept in those little bowls alone. In fact, they're illegal in some parts of Europe, and they can live for 40 years, and they have social lives.
When members of society do get around to considering animal welfare and thinking more deeply about our treatment of the animals we eat, fish are often left out of the conversation or, at best, an afterthought. Why do you think this is?
Yeah, fishes have the disadvantage of evolving in a very different milieu than what we have done. We're air breathers, so we can at least hear what our fellow animals on terra firma are saying, the sounds they make. Fishes are actually very acoustic. They make tons of different sounds with different parts of their bodies, rubbing their swim bladder against neighboring organs and grinding their teeth, and they make grunts. There are fishes called grunts because of the sound they make, and sea robins for the sounds they make, and this sort of thing. So fishes actually make a lot of sounds. Is that fishes, they've evolved in water, and not on land. So our senses and our capacity for empathy is lowered when you take an animal who's in such a different setting, breathing water, and also just kind of out of sight, out of view. It's only in the last few decades that we've had scuba gear, underwater cinematography and this sort of thing, that allows us to observe and witness them in ways that we couldn't before. Before that, it was almost always an animal, a fish is out of water and not in its element and usually dead. So you can't learn very much from dead specimens. So that's a real disadvantage for them. It's kind of alienating. It fuels the assumptions that they're uh, small brained, and they're not intelligent, and they don't have feelings, because we can't see it on their faces. They don't have facial expressions, but they have chemicals. They have a fear chemical called Schreckstoff. It's a German word for scary stuff, and they can communicate that among each other by releasing this chemical. That's just one example of a subtle form of communication that we would never know about unless we hadn't developed biochemistry and careful sampling techniques and that sort of thing, all relatively recently. So, because they're literally and metaphorically below the surface of our consciousness and awareness, we've sold them short. And it's only in recent times, with uh, scientists asking interesting questions about how animals and how fishes feel and think, that we've started to dismantle those old assumptions.
Considering that more fish are killed for food than chickens, pigs, and cows combined, how can we successfully put fish closer to the center of the conversation when discussing the ways in which we can create a better world for animals?
Yeah, we need to convey the unfathomable magnitude of the take of fishes that we have, with an estimate of over 2 trillion from one source per year. If you I calculated, if you take the average, take just say the average size of one of those fishes is the length of a dollar bill, a few inches long. You line them up end to end. That line would go. That row of fishes would go to the sun and back. That's 93 million miles. Yes, I did the math. I'm not good at math, but I'm good enough to know that's accurate. And you'd still have a few 100 billion left. So just putting it in terms that maybe people can fathom, because we don't count the number of fishes we kill. We measure them by weight, and it's typically 100 million tons a year. And the peak of that is not according to our fishing effort. It's limited by how many fish there are to take. we've depleted a lot of population. So this gets into bigger picture stuff like not just food choices, but population size. This is an elephant in the room that's just not discussed. When human population gets in the news, it's almost always in the context of, oh, heaven forbid, Japan has a negative population growth. They're headed for tough times. It's really lunacy to have that view in the sense that we live in a finite planet. There's only so much room, and it's not a good path to keep increasing our numbers and overrunning the earth. And look at the problems of wars and refugee migrations. These are not unrelated to that. There's only so many resources, and and people have to eat as well. And I had an economist tell me, well, innovation, the green revolution, and that sort of thing, very important. And innovation can help to keep us going and look sustainable for a while, but it's nothing sustainable when you're causing biodiversity loss to the degree that we are. Extinctions. I learned a really gobsmacking statistic that was published in an article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences a few years ago, which looked at the biomass, that's essentially the dry weight of all vertebrates on Earth. This is not counting fishes; they didn't include them in the calculation. But of all the mammals or all the vertebrates on land, you can use either metric. The ratios are: humans make up 36% today on the planet. Livestock, i.e., the animals we eat, 60%, and then do the math. The remainder for wildlife is 4%. I was stunned. I fell out of my chair when I read that. 4% is the biomass of wild animals. And the two other categories, humans and livestock, are about food in the sense that it's us who need to be fed, and livestock, the animals we raise to eat. It's a very inefficient way to feed us. So innovation hasn't been very helpful to those 4% remaining in the formerly 99.9%, a few 100,000 years ago. So those numbers really speak to a dire problem that we need to address, and we're not really addressing it. And that's very unintelligent of us as a species.
After your decades of research on animal behavior and sentience, what conclusion have you come to about the ways in which we should be treating animals?
There's so much potential there, John. We're an alert, aware, intelligent species with unprecedented ability to share information through various channels and communicate, which is to say there's huge potential for change. Unfortunately, we're a bit like cats. We don't really like change. We tend to be averse to change. Um, we like our patterns of behavior. We like to feel comfortable with what we're used to. Um, but we have to come to a reckoning. We have to channel our intelligence as a species into broad solutions, uh, starting with what we eat. Eating high on the food chain. And here's another statistic that speaks to the inefficiency of eating animals. Animal agriculture uses about 83% of the farmed land on Earth today, and it produces about 18% of the calories we consume. If you eat plants directly, you can feed so much more people that way. If you eat plants by eating the animals that ate the plants, it takes far more plants to build a cow and a chicken to then eat the chicken and the cow than it does if you eat the plant calories at that lower trophic level. So I don't know if I'm putting that in a very clear way, but um, it's just very, very ecologically unsustainable to eat high on the food chain. There's a reason why, to take two species in North America where we live, there's a reason why bald eagles are quite rare compared to Canada geese. They're both birds, and they're both about the same size. They weigh about the same amount. Canada geese are grazing birds. They're vegetarians. They eat grass. I'm not recommending we switch to grass diet, but we can eat tons of varied plant foods. And then, of course, eagles are meat eaters, scavengers, and carnivores. And there's just a lot less energy available to sustain many of them. This is why, to use the title from a book published in 1978 by an American ecologist, why big fierce animals are rare. Big fierce animals are rare. Lions and tigers are very rare, not just because we've extirpated them in much of their former range, but because they eat meat, and there's only so many that can support that. Wildebeests, zebras, impalas, the animals lions try and catch, are far more abundant, not just in numbers but in biomass. It is very, very inefficient and very, very poor ecology to eat meat. When there were a few 100,000 humans walking the earth in historical times, not so. And we were mainly scavengers then anyway. We didn't have slaughterhouses and aquaculture operations. Um, but now we're, what, 8 billion or so. That's taking a huge, huge toll on biodiversity and life and stability of life on Earth. And not just them, not just other animals, but humans as well, of course. It all comes back to haunt us with our long lifespans and low reproductive rate. Not low reproductive rate collectively, but we're not nimble. Take a fruit fly or even a small fish, they're much more evolutionary nimble because they have short generation spans. We have long ones. We're not very good at adapting. We're clever culturally, but because we're clever, there's, back to the earlier point, there's so much potential for us to rein in our growth, rein in our population growth, and to change our eating habits. And that's an exciting thing to be working on. As a plant-based person myself, as a vegan for over 30 years, I know I feel good about what I eat, and I know that I can encourage people to do the same thing. And it's a growing sector of society, but it needs to grow a lot faster than it is.
Amazing. Cheers to that. If you had to look back on your life's work up to this point, what would you say is your greatest discovery or contribution to create a better world for animals?
I've had the good fortune of growing up in a stable household with good parents who encouraged my curiosity and cared about animals as a model for me. And I was able to get a great education, a biology degree, a master's and PhD. I had the resources to do that, and I don't take that for granted. I've been very fortunate to have those opportunities. I'm one of the haves in the world. And because of that, I've been able to develop various skills. I worked in animal protection for several decades, but eventually realized that I could write books. And I feel grateful to have had the opportunity to do that, and I'm still able to do that. And so I'm working on a new book, and I'm very proud of my past books. And it's an exciting time to be an ethologist, one who studies animal behavior, because science is asking questions that were taboo through much of the 20th century. Questions like, what do animals think and feel? How are their emotions? What's their experience of pain? The privacy issue we talked about earlier means that we can't know for sure, but we can sure be pretty confident in what we know. We can show that, for instance, just learned this today from the New York Declaration on Consciousness. I already knew this. Flies have an attention span. The mirror mark test. Animals recognize themselves in front of a mirror. Bumblebees will play. Bumblebees will play. What? I mean, that would be considered a heretical statement just a generation ago. But now we have carefully designed studies where bumblebees can go straight to a food source, but you give them an opportunity to roll around with colored wooden balls in a little side chamber. They take that trip, they take that detour and roll these balls around for a while. And if they're stuck to the floor, they don't prefer them because they're not as interactive. We like the ones that can roll around. These are carefully designed experiments, and it just makes you wonder what's going on in a bee's world. That's a relatively small brain, but it is a brain, and it's got hundreds of thousands of neurons with just limitless connections. This is revolutionary stuff. What we're finding out about how other animals, what their capabilities are, their inner lives is pretty spellbinding. So I feel very fortunate that science is in that space now, and I, as a writer of books, I get to try and synthesize this information and make it accessible to lay readers. We don't have to be scientists to understand and appreciate the implications of these discoveries.
This was great. Your work is so vital. We can have all the research in the world, but if there's no way for the general public to really grasp that information, then it's useless. So the fact that you're writing books and conveying this message is huge. That's what a Fish Knows did for me and so many others in terms of teaching people the value and the hidden world that fish experience. Before you go, I would love if you could tell me and my listeners how they can get involved with your work and take action for animals alongside you.
With my work, you can go to my website, www.jonathanbalcombe.com, and there's just some examples of my writings and such there. But there's also, right front and center, you can subscribe to a bi-monthly newsletter called All Things Fish and Flies. I've added a little bit about insects because my most recent grown-up book was called Superfly. And that's a good way to get engaged with me and see what I'm up to. I update people on what I've been up to, but more to the point, you can find articles. I give links to articles about recent findings about fishes, and there's a video and a joke of the month kind of thing too. So it's important that these things be entertaining to some degree. So I hope to see people there.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you, John.
Jonathan's life work is inspiring. Our conversation was illuminating and a stellar peek behind the curtain of the lives that aquatic animals live. His perspective and knowledge about the inner lives of fish is the exact kind of information that the general public needs to know in order to care more deeply about these animals and to make kinder choices for them. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you felt like this conversation was meaningful, please share it with your friends and family. Also, please like, share, and subscribe to listen to upcoming episodes.